The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the fields, glistening like liquid gold. The air was thick with the scent of freshly tilled earth and blooming wildflowers. This farm, nestled on the outskirts of a small town, bore witness to countless seasons and stories, but none would unfold quite like this one. That crisp autumn morning, the farmer, a stoic man named Henry, stepped out onto his porch, surveying what had become his lifelong passion. Rows of corn danced in the gentle breeze, a testament to years of toil and determination. Each plant stood tall, holding its own against the uncertainties of nature. But even the most resilient crops couldn't prepare him for what was about to come. A black SUV rumbled down the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust behind it. Henry squinted against the sunlight, nerves prickling at the back of his mind. He had seen this vehicle before, lurking on the outskirts of town, whispers trailing behind it like a fading song. A name that dripped with irony, for they didn't come to give but to take. He felt the tightening in his chest and shifted his weight, memories surging like waves. Years ago, he had buried his father in that very dirt, a complex patchwork of love and loss. The farm had been a sanctuary, a legacy not just bound to the land but deep in the family's roots. And now, intruders sought to wrest it from his grasp. As the car rolled to a stop, heavy footsteps echoed against the gravel, dark silhouettes spilling out onto his land. A sense of foreboding washed over him. They moved with confidence, backed by numbers and power, brandishing their desires like weapons. The leader, a sharp-featured man with glinting eyes named Carter, approached Henry, his smug smile betraying an arrogant belief that his ambition would unfurl like the sails of a ship ready to conquer. "Nice place you've got here, Henry. Been thinking it's time for an upgrade for you and your family." His voice dripped with a calculated charm, concealing the predator lurking beneath. Henry remained stoic, his gaze unwavering. "This is my father's land, my land." Carter chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief, as if Henry were a child unaware of the big, wide world beyond his horizon. "You misunderstand, friend. We're not here to negotiate, we're here to help you see the bigger picture. This land, it's ripe for development." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Henry's heart pounded, each beat echoing the fear he'd held at bay for too long. He was all too familiar with the lure of profit, the promises that came laced with a smile but veiled in shadows. The thin veil of civility began to rip. He stepped forward, fists clenching, his voice steady. "This is my home. My roots go deep, Mr. Carter." But the Redeemer's claws were deep, their ambition blinding. The crew fanned out, surveying the land with greedy eyes, fingers itching, minds racing with dreams of steel and concrete. Henry felt the weight of isolation begin to press down upon him. He couldn't defend this place alone. The townsfolk were scattered like leaves in the wind, fearful of the powerful machine that was bearing down on them. Yet, in his solitude, glimmers of resolve flickered. Years ago, Henry had trained not just in the art of farming but also in the essence of self-defense. Lessons learned alongside his father, mastering the history of those who fought to keep what they held dear. This wasn't just about land, it was about spirit, identity. A fire sparked within him, a flame that had not flickered out just yet. "Listen to me, Henry," Carter continued, his voice a velvet snare. "How long do you think you can hold out? The world is changing. You could be one of the lucky ones, or you could be left in the dust." Henry began to sense the pitch in the air shift around them, palpable tension filling every crack in the ground. He could respond with rage, a futile emotion against such deep-seated greed, or he could translate the energy burning within into action. Instead, he took a deep breath and locked eyes with Carter. "The world may change, but I won't leave my land." Laughter erupted from the crew, a cruel chorus that belittled his stance. Carter held up a hand to silence his followers, the mirth fading from his eyes. At that moment, emotions swelled beneath the surface, energy swirling with a crystalline clarity. With a nod, Henry chose his own path, one that required not just brute force but cunning and intelligence. He eyed the tools that lay strewn about, remnants of past seasons. A pitchfork leaned against the barn. Its metal gleamed ominously in the fading light. It was a tool for growth, but in this moment it would serve a different purpose. "Carter, you think this is just about fighting? Let's take this up a notch," Henry said, his voice steady, calm. He gestured toward the fields. The Redeemers paused, uncertainty rippling through their ranks, intrigue mixing with arrogance. They were confident, but the ground was shifting beneath them. Henry slid towards the barn, his mind racing with strategy. His father had always taught him to stand his ground, but also to outthink his opponent. "Gather the crops, boys," Henry called over his shoulder, his tone laced with command. "You want an offer." And as he spoke, he yanked open the barn doors, revealing barrels filled with his prized produce, apples, berries, and vegetables, all beautifully preserved. The crew exchanged glances, skepticism warring with curiosity. Carter's frustration morphed into intrigue. He felt a thrill at calling their bluff. Carter scoffed, but Henry could feel the gears turning behind his eyes. "Is it?" The words hung in the air. His heart raced with a mixture of dread and excitement. Was he risking everything or bluffing them out? Every pulse spoke of purpose. "Fine," Carter winked, the wheels of ambition turning again. "Let's make this interesting." The tension cracked, charging the atmosphere like a storm about to break. Henry gripped the pitchfork tighter, feeling it seethe with potential. He was not only fighting for his land, but for every farmer before him. And with a firm grip on his resolve, he took a stance, readying himself for what was to come. Days turned into nights as plans unfurled. Local farmers rallied together, whispering comfort and strength into the shadows while strategizing in the moonlight. They weren't just neighbors now. They were comrades in a fight for their future. Together, they set traps and reinforced the boundaries of the land, creating barriers that blended seamlessly into the field's heart. One morning, just as dawn began to break, the clash unfolded as if scripted in slow motion. The Redeemers returned, confident, accustomed to bending the world to their will. They rolled onto the farm with their sleek vehicles and towering arrogance, but little did they know, they were met not only with a determined farmer but an entire community together, united by something far stronger than steel. In the distance, Henry saw Carter's eyes narrow, frustration mounting. He bellowed, but the local farmers stood strong and resolute. The pitchfork in Henry's hands felt like a symbol of resistance, more powerful than any weapon forged in animosity. The confrontation unfolded, each side grappling with the fate of the land. Words turned into shouts, as neighbors fortified one another with vision and hope. It was a conflict crafted not just from resources but from something deeper, the belief in place, in history, in each other. As the dust danced around them, anger and fear mingled, and in that charged atmosphere Henry caught sight of something transformative, more than just bodies clashing but a spirit igniting. The farmers shouted their own truths, their stories intertwined with the farm beneath their feet, their voices growing louder, harmonizing against the tide of greed. Yet a darkness cloaked Carter and his crew, their belief in power defining the battle. Henry could feel that darkness creeping closer, whispers fluttering, threatening their resolve. But as shadows engulfed everything, a spark ignited in the heart of the land. It was in the face of adversity that each farmer guarded their crops, using ingenuity and strength. They toppled wooden crates, barricaded pathways, outmaneuvering the Redeemers with sheer will. An unstoppable force emerged from the depths of that old barn, where echoes danced through the walls, stories of farmers before him, crafting an anthem of resilience. And as the clash reached its crescendo, something shifted. Amid shouts and struggles, Carter's confidence began to wane. The community formed an impenetrable wall, fields swaying not just with crops but with shared dreams, a history woven beautifully into every furrow. It became clear this place was so much more than land. It was a heartbeat, it was love, it was unwavering. In the haze of chaos, Henry raised that pitchfork high, a symbol of defiance. He shouted, voice carrying over a sea of defiance. It reverberated with strength and hearts aligned, a mantra echoing through the soil. And at that moment, doubt slipped into Carter's mind, realization dawning like the sun breaking through clouds. Defeat was not just a surging tide, it was enveloping Carter whole, cracking his facade. Those fierce community voices became a unified force, resonating not just against a threat but igniting shards of hope. And as he stepped back, Henry noticed a flicker of fear amidst bravado. Perhaps he underestimated the depth of this place. With the sun climbing higher, lifting shadows from every corner, something shifted. The plunderers turned the tide, and one by one they began to back away, realizing this was not a battle to win. This was a way of life, echoed in every corner of the community, a legacy written into the heart of the earth. With one final glance at the land, Carter's bravado shattered, replaced by uncertainty. "We'll come back," he sneered, but the words rang hollow, a tarnished echo. In that moment, Henry knew they had protected what mattered. They stood together, shoulders squared against the beating sun, hearts beating stronger in unified resistance. He looked at his neighbors, and they wore expressions charged with triumph. It wasn't just about the fields. It had become about hard-won respect, about love and choice. Silently, they vowed to tend not just to their crops but to the stories woven deep into the fabric of the land. As evening fell and birds sang their songs, Henry looked out over the fields and felt a swell of pride. This wasn't just a place, it was home. It was alive. And those who underestimated it, those who thought they could plunder without consequence, had learned a powerful lesson. The spirit of the land, its heartbeat, could not be extinguished so easily. Years would pass, seasons marking time, but the memory of that day would live on in laughter, in shared meals, in milestones celebrated. Because in the end, a farmer's training is not just found in plows or pitchforks, but in honor and courage. And as night descended over the fields, a promise lingered in the air. This was just the beginning. The sun sat low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields where the corn stood tall and proud. Each stalk whispered secrets of the season, telling stories of patience and hard work. But on this quiet morning, the air felt different. A storm brewed on the horizon, not of rain, but of danger. In a small farmhouse at the edge of the land, Farmer Joe stood on his porch, hands resting on his hips, eyes narrowed. He watched as a convoy of black trucks rolled down the dirt road, engines growling like hungry wolves. Joe had heard the rumors, the tales of plunderers known as the New Age developers, a name that belied the predatory nature behind it. They didn't come to help the community or to build. They came to take. Joe straightened, the pride of the generations before him surging in his chest. This land was not just earth. It was history, filled with the blood, sweat, and tears of his ancestors. As the trucks neared, his heart pounded, knowing he couldn't let them waltz in like they owned the place. The lead truck screeched to a stop, dust swirling in the air like ghosts. A tall man with slick-back hair stepped out, wearing an immaculately tailored suit. His demeanor dripped with arrogance, a stark contrast to the rustic charm of the farm. This was Carter, the face of the plunderers. With a confident stride, he walked toward Joe, a smirk playing on his lips. "Nice little patch of land you have here," Carter said, casting a glance over the fields as if appraising a piece of meat. "We'd like to buy it." Joe's jaw tightened. "This place isn't for sale," he replied, his voice steady, though he could feel the anger rising from his gut. Carter chuckled, a sound that grated against Joe's ears. "That's where you're wrong. The world is changing, old man. Land like this is priceless to a developer. We can turn it into a profitable venture, hotels, shops, you name it." The offer hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It reminded Joe of a snake coiling around its prey, ready to strike. He thought of his father, toiling under the sun, planting seeds with dreams for a future wrapped around them. Each row of crops represented hope, survival. "No," Joe said, his voice firm. "This land has been in my family for generations." Carter's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. "Think about it, Joe. You're getting old. You can't farm forever. Don't let pride stop you from making a smart decision." Joe could feel the weight of that $1 million offer pressing down on him, but it was meaningless. The land wasn't just a financial investment. It was home, identity. Memories rushed through his mind like wind through the cornfield, the laughter of children, the warmth of family dinners, the stories passed down with every season. "You're mistaken if you think I'll back down," Joe said, a fire igniting within him. Carter stepped closer, his presence looming. "This isn't a negotiation, old man. You'll be forced to sell." A tingle of fear ran through Joe, but he pushed it aside. He remembered the lessons he had learned in that very barn, lessons not just about farming but resilience and courage. He had trained for years in self-defense, honing skills that came from a time when protecting one's land was about survival. He wouldn't let those skills gather dust. With a nod, he turned to step back into the house. "You'll regret this," Carter called after him, but Joe's resolve only hardened. He was ready to defend what was rightfully his. As he entered the barn, the familiar smell of hay wrapped around him like a warm embrace. His heart raced as he thought of what was to come. This wasn't just a fight for land, it was a fight for his family's legacy. He grabbed tools, a pitchfork, a sturdy shovel, no weapons, just his tools, ready to defend his home. Outside, the sunlight glare was broken by the shadows cast by the approaching trucks, the tension thick as a summer storm. Joe grabbed the pitchfork and stepped back outside, planting his feet firmly in the dirt. He shouted, his voice echoing through the stillness. Silence blanketed the field as the nearby farmers, neighbors who had shared in his struggles and triumphs, began to gather. They emerged from their homes, drawn by the sound of Joe's defiance. One by one, they began to stand beside him, their faces resolute, knowing well what was at stake. Among them was Clara, a fierce woman who had run her family's dairy farm without backing down for years. She shouted, rallied by the fire of his courage. The sight bolstered Joe's spirit, knowing that he wasn't alone. The strength in community surged around them like an electric current. The farmers faced the approaching threat together, empowered by their unity. Carter's team stepped out of their trucks, sneering at the assembled group. One of them laughed, brandishing a clipboard like a weapon. "The law is on our side." Joe stood tall, his heart racing but his voice steady. "You underestimate us. This is our land, our home. We've nurtured this soil." The plunderers shifted, folding their arms, but doubt crept into their confident facade. They were accustomed to easy victories, but this was different. This was a community ready to defend what they cherished. In that tense moment, Clara stepped forward, her green eyes blazing. "We'll fight you in every way we know how," she declared, unwavering. "You think you can take what's ours without consequence?" As they exchanged glances, an unspoken agreement passed among the local farmers. Joe felt the tide shifting, a strength building within their shared history and purpose. This wasn't just another battle, it was a testament to everything they believed in. Carter scoffed, but the smirk had faded, revealing the uncertainty lingering beneath. Joe stepped forward, thrusting the pitchfork into the ground, its metal glinting ominously. "It's not just about tools, it's about heart. We've trained for this, not just in farming, but in standing together." Carter hesitated. The bravado slipped from his face, the air charged with the enormity of the moment. The farmers took the chance to prepare, strategizing quietly in the backdrop. Each played to their strengths. Some minds were sharp, others were agile. They used the resources of the farm to devise a plan, taking advantage of every tool at their disposal. Joe led the charge, confidence radiating from him as he remembered the countless nights spent training and envisioning this very fight. As the sun dipped lower, the backdrop transformed into an impending storm cloud, billowing rage into the atmosphere. Shouts erupted as their plan came together. Hay bales were stacked to form barriers, tools fought beside them like loyal dogs, and a feeling of invincibility began to swell. Word spread through the town as neighbors rallied to support the farmers, each contributing their strengths. Some brought food, others brought extension cords and vehicles. They were ready to fight back. As night began to close in, Joe peered over the field, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He shouted, a rallying cry flaring in the night. "Tonight, we show them how far we're willing to go to protect our home." And as darkness enveloped the horizon, the scene became lit by the determination in their eyes. The air crackled with purpose, every heartbeat echoing with their shared convictions. Carter and his team approached, but they were met not with fear but with the raw energy of community, a force fueled by generations of hope and resilience. Farmers stood shoulder to shoulder, brandishing tools, ready to protect their land. "Enough games, Joe," Carter sneered one last time, masking the tremble in his voice. "You can't hold out forever." Joe's voice rang out, unwavering. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. This is more than a piece of land for us. This is our blood and sweat." And as if in response to his words, a gust of wind swept through the field, rustling the plants like an attentive audience, whispering encouragement. The tension reached a fever pitch, and in a moment that felt strangely cinematic, the first clash came: tools against ideals, wills against greed. As mud flew and voices rose, Joe lost himself in the rhythm of the battle. Memories of training surged through him, guiding each move. Every shove, every defense became a dance of determination. The Plunderers underestimated the power of a united community and their knowledge of the land. They tripped in mud, stumbled over hay, and found themselves outmatched not just by sheer numbers but by heart. The farmers held their ground, every shout of determination rebounding off the night, echoing through the ages. Amid the chaos, Henry could see the moment when doubt sank into Carter's confidence, his posture slackening. "We need to regroup," one of the Plunderers shouted, glancing nervously as they faltered under the pressure. But Joe pressed on, flight set in his muscles, energy surging more than just for survival. This was not just a defense. It was a declaration of independence from outside greed. The battle raged on, the spirit of the community rising with each passing moment. In the throes of the fight, something shifted, a realization settling in. The flood of honor forged in the faces of farmers, strengthened by the bonds of shared purpose, resonated louder than the roar of engines. As the evening shadow deepened, something remarkable happened. The Plunderers began to retreat, hesitance invading every step. Carter's face darkened, his bravado finally shattered. He shouted, a thin thread of anger weaving through his voice. "You can come back all you want, Carter," Joe replied, the weight of his conviction thick in the air. "But we'll always be here. You'll never take what's ours." And as the last of the Plunderers sped away, the community erupted into cheers, voices lifting into the night like a symphony of victory. Joe felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, a release of everything that had built up during this struggle. They had fought together, and they had prevailed. Yet this victory was more than just a battle won. It was a reminder that communities bound by purpose could stand against any storm, that love for the land transcended greed. Together, they had shown that resilience, courage, and training in the art of defense could turn tides in the most dire of circumstances. As the moon rose high, its gentle glow illuminating the fields, Joe looked out at the land that had given him so much. It was a reminder that even in the face of plunder, there lay a strength born not just of soil but of the heart, a legacy that would endure. Underneath the stars, the battle may have ended, but the fight for home and heritage had just begun. They stood united, ready to nurture the land, ready to defend its spirit. An unwavering force, not just a farmer but a guardian of their history, a pledge echoed throughout the fields for years to come. The sun sank low over the horizon, its fiery glow casting long shadows across the fertile fields. Dust wafted in the air, marking the end of the day's work. But despite the beauty of twilight, a storm brewed on the edge of this quiet farming community, one that threatened to uproot everything. Farmer Bill stood watching from his porch, the old wooden boards creaking under his weight. His fingers traced the weathered railing, familiar and comforting. Each splinter held stories of hard work and laughter, a legacy that stretched far beyond the horizon. As he gazed into the fading light, a pair of black SUVs came rumbling down the gravel road, disrupting the peace like thunder in an otherwise clear sky. Bill's heart quickened, the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. He had heard the whispers in the diner, the conversations laden with fear. Tales of the Plunderers, a ruthless development group that sought to seize land across the county, were no longer just stories to be shared over coffee. They had come to his doorstep. As the SUVs rolled to a stop, 4 imposing figures stepped out, their demeanor conveying a sense of entitlement. The leader, a sharply dressed man named Mark, strode toward Bill with an air of confidence that felt almost absurd against the rustic backdrop of the farm. "Nice place you've got here, Bill," Mark said, his voice smooth and dripping with false charm. "But I can assure you it's about to become a prime location for a new shopping complex." Bill crossed his arms, a wave of defiance surging through him. "This isn't just land for sale, Mark. This is my home. My father built this farm with his bare hands." Mark chuckled, a sound that grated against Bill's nerves. "You're going to need to understand something, old friend. This is business. The world is moving on, and if you're not willing to adapt, then you'll be left behind." With every word, Bill felt the heat rising inside him. Smart choice. Was that what they called it? He thought of the hours he spent tilling the soil, planting seeds, and nurturing life. This land wasn't just a plot of earth, it held his family's legacy. "Let me be clear," Bill said, his voice firm. "You can't bulldoze our history just because you think you have the upper hand. I won't sell." Mark's smile faltered for a moment, and Bill could see the irritation bubbling beneath the surface. "You'll regret this decision," Mark warned, stepping closer, his eyes darkening like storm clouds. And with that, the men returned to their vehicles, leaving Bill standing on the porch, heart hammering in his chest. An unsettling fear crept over him, not just for himself, but for the land, for everything he cherished. The message was clear: they would not back down easily. That night, sleep eluded Bill. He lay wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation over and over in his mind. The threat had felt different this time, more aggressive, more personal. He recalled his father's voice, wise and steady, reminding him of the importance of standing his ground. "Fight for what you love," his father had often said. As dawn broke, spilling light over the fields, a plan began to form in Bill's mind. He was no stranger to conflict. He had trained himself over the years, leaning into self-defense classes and community workshops. He knew how to protect himself in his home. It was time to put that training into action. Bill gathered the tools of the trade. A pitchfork, some rope, and old wooden crates lay nearby, remnants of summer's harvest. He began to set traps around the perimeter of his property, simple yet effective obstacles that would slow the plunderers down. He wanted them to think twice before moving in. The morning of the plunderers' return, Bill's heart raced with anticipation. He had gathered a small group of local farmers who shared his concerns, neighbors who understood the importance of standing together. They met under the big oak tree, the heart of their community. "Look, folks," Bill spoke, his voice steady. "They think they can take what's ours without consequence. We all know the soil runs deep here, and we can't let them bulldoze over our family's legacy." Nods of agreement flowed through the group, each face mirrored his determination. Clara, a fierce woman known for her dairy farm, stepped forward. "I'll stand with you, Bill. They won't push us around." With their spirits high, they came up with a plan, utilizing their knowledge of the land against the encroaching threat. Bill felt a sense of purpose swell within him, a fire that hadn't flickered since the confrontation. They wouldn't just defend their properties, they would reclaim their dignity. As the sun rose higher, eerily brightening the sky, the cloud of black SUVs appeared on the horizon again. This time they weren't alone. Several large trucks pulled behind, filled with equipment diggers, trucks designed for heavy lifting, marking their intent as a declaration of war. Bill's muscles tensed, yet he stood resolute. The farmers emerged from their hiding spots, ready to defend their homes. Driven by a shared vision, they positioned themselves along the property line, armed not just with tools but with resolve. Mark stepped out of his SUV again, swaggering up to Bill. He taunted, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes this time. "Progress," Bill shot back, driven by a mix of determination and anger. "Do you think you have the right to decide what happens here?" Mark's veneer of confidence cracked just a little, and Bill seized the opportunity. "We're ready for you." As the tension escalated, the farmers surged forward, fierce and united. They created a line of defense, tools ready in hand. Clara brandished a pitchfork, her stance unwavering, while others scrambled to fortify their perimeter. Every heartbeat echoed their common belief: this fight was about more than just land. Bill shouted, the words igniting a chorus of defiance among the group. They each took their positions, acting in synchrony, weaving together their strengths. The machines roared to life, heavy machinery rumbling like predators stalking their prey. The air became thick with dust and noise, but the farmers held their ground, anchored by a shared history. They began to set their traps, threading ropes between trees, creating hurdles for the machines. Bill's heart raced, adrenaline bursting through him as he coordinated the efforts, a chess game against a ruthless opponent. He remembered past training, how positioning mattered, how strategy could change the tide of a fight. Every movement felt like instinct, guided not just by his training, but by the fire of his ancestors urging him on. With precision, they began to use the natural landscape to their advantage. They flooded the field with muddy water from the nearby creek, a temporary barrier that forced the plunderers to rethink their approach. As the machine sputtered and choked, the tension escalated into frantic frustration on Mark's face. He yelled, but the machine struggled, unable to navigate through the muck that had turned the field into a battleground. Bill saw the shift happening. Nervous glances were exchanged between the plunderers. Their bravado was cracking, and the farmers sensed the momentum swinging in their favor. Every trap they had set had purpose, slowly wearing down the relentless capitalist machine. Then came the roar of an engine. They looked up to see a larger truck barreling toward the perimeter, but before it could get close, Bill stepped into view, raising his pitchfork like a warrior. He commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You can try to intimidate us, but we will not be scared off our land." He saw hesitation flash across Mark's face, a doubt seeping into the hardened resolve of the plunderers. They were not prepared for a united front, shouted Clara, lifting her pitchfork high. "You thought we would just roll over." The farmers' voices intertwined, a chorus of courage rising high as they piled against the machines, relentless in their determination. The air was electrified, the spirit of resilience surged through them. Bill could feel it, the tide was changing. In that moment, surrounded by his friends and neighbors, he realized that the fight was about more than just the land. It was about standing up for one another, about the bonds forged through shared struggles. Underneath the rising sun, the energy shifted, and as the plunderers hesitated, the farmers seized their moment. They moved together, encircling the heavy machinery, chanting together in defiance, fueled by a sense of purpose that swelled deep in their hearts. Mark noticed the change. Fear flickered in his eyes as he turned to his crew. "We need to go," he grumbled, though his voice lacked the authority it once held. Their confidence cracked under the weight of community spirit. Bill stepped forward, heart racing, knowing they couldn't let the plunderers slip away unchallenged. "This is your chance to walk away peacefully," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. Silence fell, and Mark looked over his crew, a palpable tension thickening the air. As the realization washed over them, it became clear this fight wasn't just about land. It was about pride, purpose, and identity. One by one, the plunderers turned, retreating to their vehicles, leaving behind the equipment and the dreams they once carried. Bill felt a rush of triumph swell within him as they watched the last of the convoy pull away. Cheers erupted from the farmers, laughter breaking through the anxiety that had gripped them for days. Bill felt tears of relief rush to his eyes, emotions spilling over as he looked around at those who had stood by his side. Together, they had turned the tide not just against plunderers but against doubt, fear, and despair. It was a fight won not just for their farms, but for their souls. They had reminded each other that resilience was more than strength. It was community. In the midst of celebration, Bill looked out over the fields and realized the battle had forged deeper connections, weaving tighter bonds among neighbors. They knew that protecting their land meant more than just resisting outside forces. It meant nurturing the legacy they had all inherited. As dusk settled once more over the once-sought land, Bill felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This was their home, a vibrant tapestry of hardship and hope, stories stitched as tightly as the roots of every crop they planted. Together, they had defeated not just the threat of plunderers, but the shadows that sometimes loomed large over their lives. And as they began to clean up the remnants of their battle, laughter echoed through the fields. What had once felt like a near loss had transformed into a symbol of courage, a testament to the strength found in unity. The farmers turned to each other, their hearts lighter, knowing that they had forged something far beyond individual plots of land, a home built on shared dreams, unwavering spirit, and the promise of tomorrow. The fight for their farm was only the beginning, a reminder that together they could withstand any storm. They were not just farmers, they were guardians, ready to nurture the land they loved. And in that sacred bond, they knew they would always stand strong. The morning sun peeked over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the sprawling fields. The dew glistened like diamonds on the blades of grass, and the birds sang a joyful chorus. But just beyond the horizon, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that would shake the very foundation of the farm and the community. At the edge of the property, Farmer Jake stood on his porch sipping coffee from a chipped mug, unaware that his life was about to change forever. He had spent years cultivating this land, every inch of it, a testament to hard work and stubborn resilience. Jake was a man of the earth, his hands calloused but his heart open. Little did he know, those very hands would soon be put to the test. Suddenly, the peaceful morning was shattered by the sound of engines revving. A convoy of dark trucks rolled down the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust as they approached. Jake squinted, feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He had heard the rumors of ruthless developers, plunderers who wanted to seize the land for profit. But was that really happening? Now, here. As the truck screeched to a halt, Jake's instincts kicked in. 4 men in tailored suits, all armed with bravado and sharp smiles, stepped out. The leader, a slick-haired man named Carter, strutted toward Jake with an air of superiority, like a hawk eyeing its prey. "Morning, Jake. Beautiful place you have here," he said, his smile wide but not reaching his eyes. Jake's coffee cup trembled in his grip, frustration bubbling to the surface. He asked, his voice steady but firm. Carter gestured expansively. "Imagine condos, shopping centers, the works. You'd be rich, rich." The word echoed in Jake's mind, tinged with bitterness. He could see the glint of greed in Carter's eyes, the way he referred to the land as property, striping it of its heart and soul. "This land is not for sale, Carter. It's my home," Jake replied, feeling a fierce protectiveness rise within him. "It's been in my family for generations." Carter's expression soured, but he quickly regained his composure. "Let's not be hasty. There's a price for everything." As the words hung in the air like heavy smoke, Jake felt the weight of his ancestors pressing upon him. His father had taught him to stand his ground, to defend what was right. He refused to let this slick-haired opportunist undermine the legacy that lay in the soil beneath his feet. "Get off my land," Jake said, his voice low and resolute. Carter chuckled, but there was an edge to it. "You'll regret this, Jake." The threat hung between them like a blade, slicing through the crisp morning air. Jake felt a rush of anger and fear mingle within him. But fear, he reminded himself, was something you faced head-on. As Carter and his henchmen returned to their trucks, leaving a cloud of dust and a sense of dread behind, Jake stared after them, heart pounding in his chest. They were just a bunch of thugs in suits, but they had power. What could he possibly do to stop them? That night was restless. Jake tossed and turned, replaying every encounter, every word exchanged. He felt like a soldier preparing for battle, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. This land was more than dirt and crops. It was his family history, his identity, all intertwined with the land's very essence. But Jake wasn't just a farmer, he was a fighter at heart. He remembered the self-defense courses he had taken years ago, the strength he had built both physically and mentally. In those classes, they had taught him about strategy, about the importance of training. And now, those lessons came flooding back. The next morning, Jake rose early, the sun barely cresting the horizon. He grabbed his worn calendar and flipped through the pages filled with reminders of past battles, both within himself and against the odds. He gathered his tools, a pitchfork, some rope, and a shovel, but more importantly, he reached for his spirit of defiance. He knew he couldn't face the plunderers alone, so he drove into town, seeking out the people who understood the land and its worth. He went to the diner, the heart of the community where conversations flowed like the coffee from the pot. As he entered, the chatter quieted for just a moment. Faces turned, curiosity mingling with concern. He approached a table where Clara, an old friend and local dairy farmer, sat with a few others. Clara asked, her brow furrowing. "They're trying to take our land," Jake said, his voice low but firm. "The plunderers, Carter and his crew." Gasps and murmurs buzzed around the table. Clara exclaimed. "I need everyone's help," Jake urged, his heart racing. "We need to stand together. This isn't just my fight, it's ours. We need to strategize." The group leaned in, a fierce determination igniting in their eyes. "We know this land better than they ever will," Clara stated. They spent the afternoon brainstorming, creating a plan that involved setting up barriers, using the land to their advantage. They plotted out traps they could use to slow down any heavy machinery, ways to protect their farm, simple yet effective strategies rooted in years of knowledge of their land. As Jake drove home, adrenaline pulsed through his veins. The thought of fighting for their community, their way of life, filled him with purpose. He was grateful to have people around him willing to stand up against these outsiders. Days turned into a week and preparations continued. The farmers gathered at Jake's place, testing their traps, reinforcing gates, and sharing stories of how their families had built this land from the ground up. They were not just creating defenses, they were building camaraderie. When the day of confrontation finally came, the sun rose with a false sense of peace. Jake felt the tension in the air as he gathered the farmers for one last pep talk. "This is it," he said, his voice steady as steel. "Today we show them we won't be intimidated. This land is ours. We are warriors for our heritage and we will protect it." His words sparked a fire in the group and they nodded in unison, united. The time had come. As the familiar sound of engines filled the air, the farmers took their positions along the property line, hearts pounding but spirits high. The plunderers emerged from their trucks, looking confident, but Jake could see the doubt starting to creep into their expressions as they approached. "Here we are again, Jake," Carter called out, feigning a casual smile. "Maybe you should have thought it through before stepping onto my land," Jake shot back, resolve firm. The tension crackled like static electricity in the air. Jake felt every heartbeat resonating with the stakes at hand. This was no ordinary confrontation. It was a clash of wills, a test of determination. "Let's make this simple," Carter said, gesturing to his crew. "I think you've underestimated us," Jake replied. And with that, the farmers sprang into action, a coordinated effort built on weeks of preparation. They activated their traps ropes leading to strategically placed bales of hay that tumbled down, creating barriers that confused the plunderers and slowed their heavy machinery. The plunderers were unprepared. Chaos erupted as they stumbled over the obstacles, losing their balance and momentum. Jake could see the realization sinking in. The farmers had successfully harnessed the land to fight back. Carter's bravado crumbled, his confidence turning to desperation. He shouted commands, but the chaos had already thrown them off course. The farmers, anchored deep in their resolve, worked in unison, embodying the spirit of a community that refused to back down. One of Carter's men yelled, panic creeping into his voice, but Jake wasn't finished. "This is not just about stopping you from taking our land," he shouted, galvanizing the farmers around him. As they rallied together, the contrast between the two sides became stark. The plunderers, cloaked in arrogance and greed, found themselves facing the grit and determination of a community unwilling to let go of their roots. With every shove of a pitchfork and every pull of a rope, the realization hit them like a thunderbolt. They were fighting not just for territory, but for a way of life, the heritage that threaded through generations. Jake and the farmers held strong against the encroaching threat, giving it everything they had. Each barrier built, each maneuver executed, steadily chipped away at the plunderers' confidence. The cries of surprise resonated through the air as machine after machine faltered, caught in their traps. Just when it seemed that their fortunes were changing, Carter bellowed, "Go harder!" But every shout rang hollow as they found themselves on the losing end. Exhaustion began to take its toll on the plunderers, doubt creeping in like shadows in the fading light. With one final push, Jake and his farmers surged forward, a wave of unity that symbolized their strength. They had fought side by side, hearts intertwined with every action, every decision, forging a bond that could weather any storm. In a last desperate attempt, Carter tried to rally his men, but the tide had turned. Panic spread through their ranks like wildfire, their morale eroding under the weight of a community that wouldn't relent. The sight of the farmers standing firm together held a power that no amount of money could buy. Jake locked eyes with Carter, a fierce resolve passing between them. At that moment it became clear. The plunderers had severely underestimated not just a farmer, but an entire community that was willing to fight for home. "We're not backing down," Jake declared, his voice ringing with the certainty that echoed through the air. With those words, the last of the plunderers fled, scrambling back into their trucks and tearing down the road, leaving only dust and disbelief in their wake. The farmers erupted into cheers, the sound echoing across the fields like a chorus of victory. Jake felt tears of relief spill from his eyes as he breathed deeply, the weight of uncertainty finally lifting. They had done it together. They forged a path against the odds. In the glow of the setting sun, the small group of farmers embraced, their hearts pounding with triumph and unity. This was not just a fight. It was a testament to resilience, to standing firm against the tide of greed and ambition. They had shown the plunderers that the spirit of the land and community were matters of the heart, not just property lines. As twilight wrapped the fields in its embrace, Jake looked out over the land, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and pride. His farm was not just his, it was a part of all of theirs. They had safeguarded generations of history and legacy. And as they celebrated their victory, each farmer knew that they had forged bonds deeper than crops in the ground. They had cemented a legacy of their own, one that spoke of courage, heart, and the power of community. Together, they had overcome the threat of the plunderers and written their own story, a story that would echo through the fields for years to come. The sky was a deep blue canvas, streaked with wisps of white clouds, the kind of morning that whispered promises of good harvests. But miles away from the beauty of this moment, a storm was brewing that threatened to tear apart the fabric of a beloved farm. Farmer Sam stood in the middle of his field, sweat glistening on his brow as he inspected the row of corn swaying gently in the breeze. Each stalk grew from the ground like an unyielding promise, nurtured by years of toil and love. Sam had inherited this plot from his father, who had poured his heart into every seed. But today, that history faced an unprecedented threat. Just then, the distant rumble of engines broke the tranquility, jolting Sam from his thoughts. His gaze shifted toward the horizon. 3 black trucks were barreling down the dirt road, dust swirling around them like a pack of wolves prowling for prey. Sam's heart sank as he recognized the vehicle's rumors of the land grabbers had arrived to his doorstep. He had heard tales of these plunderers, a ruthless group determined to transform farmland into lucrative developments. They brought with them promises of easy money and unthinking ambition, like predators that saw homes as mere stepping stones to riches. Sam felt a tightness in his chest. This land was not just dirt and crops, it was legacy, family, and tribulation, and it was not for sale. As the trucks squealed to a stop, the men inside hopped out dressed in sharp suits, their demeanor radiating arrogance. The leader, a man named Victor with slick hair and a tight smile, approached Sam. He walked with a swagger like he owned the earth beneath his feet. Victor greeted, his voice smooth as silk. "Looks like you're still working hard out here." Sam stood tall, planted firmly on the ground, staring into the man's eyes as that familiar storm of anger began to build within him. Victor's smile widened, unconcerned as he spread his arms wide in a show of flexibility. "You see, we're planning to turn this into a shopping complex." Sam felt his blood boil. "This isn't just a piece of land to me, this is home. My family has worked this ground for generations." Victor cocked an eyebrow, the gleam of contempt reflecting in his eyes. "All good things must come to an end, Sam. Times change. It's smart to let go and cash in while you still can." A deep, rumbling anger surged through Sam. "You think I'll simply hand over what my father built?" Victor took a half step closer, the threat palpable in his tone. "You'll regret this decision." As the words hung in the air, an icy shiver ran down Sam's spine. But instead of backing down, something ignited within him. He had trained for this literally and metaphorically. Over the years, he'd honed various skills not just in farming but in self-defense, grappling with the lessons learned during difficult times. "I'd like to see you try," Sam replied, suddenly feeling more grounded than ever. There was power in what he believed in, a heritage that ran deeper than money. Victor's expression shifted, if only for a moment, the bravado faltering before it snapped back into place. As the plunderers returned to their trucks, Sam's heart raced, a mix of fear and determination. He knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed a plan, and he needed his community. That evening, Sam gathered the farmers from the neighborhood at the old barn, a place filled with memories and shared laughter. The air buzzed with tension as they took their seats, concern etched on each face. "Thanks for coming, everyone," Sam started, trying to keep his voice steady. "I don't have good news." Murmurs rippled through the room. Clara, who ran the local dairy farm, spoke up. Anger ignited in her voice, rallying the farmers. "Our families have survived hard winters and droughts." "Exactly," Sam replied, emboldened by her passion. "They're underestimating us. They think we're just farmers, ignorant and powerless, but we know how to defend what's ours." The group grew silent, absorbing both the urgency and hope in Sam's words. Having spent years learning self-defense, he began to brainstorm. "We can't fight them with brute force." Plans unfolded as they started strategizing, weaving ideas into a tapestry of resistance. They discussed ways to set traps and barricades, how to use the natural landscape to slow down the plunderers. Sam felt a renewed sense of purpose as he looked around the room. These farmers were not just his neighbors, they were an army, bound by love for their land. As days passed, preparations intensified. The farmers worked tirelessly, setting up barriers made from old equipment and hay bales. They fortified fences, created mud pits, and devised clever traps that would slow the plunderers down. Sam's heart swelled with pride. They were more than farmers, they were guardians of history. Then came the day of the confrontation. The air was thick with tension as the farmers took their positions along the property line. Sam felt a mixture of nerves and adrenaline coursing through him as he watched the black trucks rumble down the dirt road once more. Sam shouted, looking into the eyes of his comrades, "Remember, stay calm, stay together." As the trucks came to a halt, the men inside spilled out, each dressed in their usual suits, looking like a pack of wolves ready to strike. Victor stepped forward, clearly irritated by the sight of the assembled farmers. He mocked, flashing a disingenuous smile. "We're here to remind you that this land is ours, Victor. You won't take it without a fight," Sam asserted, planting his feet firmly in the dirt. Tension crackled in the air like electricity. The plunderers looked ready to laugh, but uncertainty flickered in their eyes. It felt as if the whole world had paused for a moment, waiting for the next move. Sam took a deep breath, tapping into the training he'd learned over the years. With a swift motion, Sam signaled for the first of their traps. The farmers sprang into action, throwing ropes that pulled down hay bales, creating a barrier that blocked the plunderers' path. Confusion washed over Victor's crew, panic mingling with anger as they stumbled over their own feet. Victor screamed, realizing their advantageous position was slipping away. But it was too late. Sam had seized the momentum. The farmers moved as one, utilizing every ounce of coordination they had developed during their training. Emotions surged within Sam, hope mingling with fury. He had turned years of hard work into a coherent defense, rallying his neighbors into a force greater than the sum of its parts. Wade, a wiry farmer known for his agility, darted toward the trucks, dodging an incoming figure attempting to pull him down. He shouted, a defiance radiating from him. They maneuvered through the chaos, creating makeshift obstructions to block access to the heavy machinery. With each obstacle they set, confidence swelled among the farmers while Victor and his crew became increasingly disoriented. As the dust began to settle, the plunderers' bravado faded, replaced by disbelief. The farmers were not just placing barriers, they were showing passion and determination, a force driven by the love for their legacy. Then came the sound of the machinery, a loud engine roaring to life meant to intimidate. But Sam shouted over the noise, "Hold your ground." As Victor's team struggled to navigate their equipment, another farmer released a rope that sent a contraption crashing toward the ground, further blocking the path. The chaos swirled around them like a tempest, the air filled with shouting and the smell of dust. "Retreat!" Victor barked, but there was a tinge of panic in his voice, a stark contrast to the confidence he had displayed earlier. The farmers, now fueled by adrenaline, pressed forward, using their knowledge of the land and smart tactics against the plunderers. They were not just fighting a real estate venture, they were fighting for their identity, their heritage. Each shout echoed like an anthem of solidarity, urging them on as they pressed into the fray. Through all the noise and confusion, Sam felt an incredible sense of clarity. This battle was about so much more than just land. It was about unity, resilience, and courage. They had refused to succumb to fear, choosing instead to harness their determination and fight for what was right. In the heart of the fray, Victor's swagger finally crumbled completely. Desperation clawed at him, and he began to glance nervously at his crew, who had started to back away from the scene. One of his men shouted, fear lacing his voice. "Go!" Victor yelled, the facade of control slipping away. With every passing moment, the tide turned further. The farmers surged with renewed strength, feeling a wave of empowerment at the sight of the plunderers retreating. As the last truck screeched away, dust clouding the air, the farmers erupted into cheers, their voices ringing out like a chorus of victory. Relief washed over Sam like a cleansing wave. They had defended not only their land but their community's spirit. He turned to Clara, who was bouncing with excitement. "We did it!" she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with triumph. "We did together," Sam replied, his heart swelling with pride. That day had become a turning point, not just in their battle against the plunderers, but also in how they saw themselves. They were not merely farmers, they were warriors, united by an unyielding love of their home. As the sun began to set, casting warm hues across the fields, Sam couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The battle had forged deeper connections among the farmers, solidifying friendships that would last for generations. In that moment, Sam knew they had built a legacy not just on the land but within one another. They had shown that strength arose from community, that standing together could weather any storm. And with that thought resonating through him, Sam looked out over the fields, each row of crops symbolizing hope and perseverance. The sky was a deep blue canvas, streaked with wisps of white clouds, the kind of morning that whispered promises of good harvests. But miles away from the beauty of this moment, a storm was brewing that threatened to tear apart the fabric of a beloved farm. Farmer Sam stood in the middle of his field, sweat glistening on his brow as he inspected the row of corn swaying gently in the breeze. Each stalk grew from the ground like an unyielding promise, nurtured by years of toil and love. Sam had inherited this plot from his father, who had poured his heart into every seed. But today, that history faced an unprecedented threat. Just then, the distant rumble of engines broke the tranquility, jolting Sam from his thoughts. His gaze shifted toward the horizon. 3 black trucks were barreling down the dirt road, dust swirling around them like a pack of wolves prowling for prey. Sam's heart sank as he recognized the vehicle's rumors of the land grabbers had arrived at his doorstep. He had heard tales of these plunderers, a ruthless group determined to transform farmland into lucrative developments. They brought with them promises of easy money and unthinking ambition, like predators that saw homes as mere stepping stones to riches. Sam felt a tightness in his chest. This land was not just dirt and crops, it was legacy, family, and tribulation. And it was not for sale. As the truck squealed to a stop, the men inside hopped out dressed in sharp suits, their demeanor radiating arrogance. The leader, a man named Victor with slick hair and a tight smile, approached Sam. He walked with a swagger like he owned the earth beneath his feet. Victor greeted, his voice smooth as silk. "Looks like you're still working hard out here." Sam stood tall, planted firmly on the ground, staring into the man's eyes as that familiar storm of anger began to build within him. Victor's smile widened, unconcerned as he spread his arms wide in a show of flexibility. "You see, we're planning to turn this into a shopping complex." Sam felt his blood boil. "This isn't just a piece of land to me, this is home. My family has worked this ground for generations." Victor cocked an eyebrow, the gleam of contempt reflecting in his eyes. "All good things must come to an end, Sam. Times change, it's smart to let go and cash in while you still can." A deep, rumbling anger surged through Sam. "You think I'll simply hand over what my father built?" Victor took a half step closer, the threat palpable in his tone. "You'll regret this decision." As the words hung in the air, an icy shiver ran down Sam's spine. But instead of backing down, something ignited within him. He had trained for this literally and metaphorically. Over the years, he'd honed various skills not just in farming but in self-defense, grappling with the lessons learned during difficult times. "I'd like to see you try," Sam replied, suddenly feeling more grounded than ever. There was power in what he believed in, a heritage that ran deeper than money. Victor's expression shifted, if only for a moment, the bravado faltering before it snapped back into place. As the plunderers returned to their trucks, Sam's heart raced, a mix of fear and determination. He knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed a plan, and he needed his community. That evening, Sam gathered the farmers from the neighborhood at the old barn, a place filled with memories and shared laughter. The air buzzed with tension as they took their seats, concern etched on each face. "Thanks for coming, everyone," Sam started, trying to keep his voice steady. "I don't have good news." Murmurs rippled through the room. Clara, who ran the local dairy farm, spoke up. Anger ignited in her voice, rallying the farmers. "Our families have survived hard winters and droughts." "Exactly," Sam replied, emboldened by her passion. "They're underestimating us. They think we're just farmers, ignorant and powerless, but we know how to defend what's ours." The group grew silent, absorbing both the urgency and hope in Sam's words. "We can't fight them with brute force," Sam continued. Plans unfolded as they started strategizing, weaving ideas into a tapestry of resistance. They discussed ways to set traps and barricades, how to use the natural landscape to slow down the plunderers. Sam felt a renewed sense of purpose as he looked around the room. These farmers were not just his neighbors. They were an army bound by love for their land. As days passed, preparations intensified. The farmers worked tirelessly, setting up barriers made from old equipment and hay bales. They fortified fences, created mud pits, and devised clever traps that would slow the plunderers down. Sam's heart swelled with pride. They were more than farmers, they were guardians of history. Then came the day of the confrontation. The air was thick with tension as the farmers took their positions along the property line. Sam felt a mixture of nerves and adrenaline coursing through him as he watched the black trucks rumble down the dirt road once more. Sam shouted, looking into the eyes of his comrades. "Remember, stay calm, stay together." As the trucks came to a halt, the men inside spilled out, each dressed in their usual suits, looking like a pack of wolves ready to strike. Victor stepped forward, clearly irritated by the sight of the assembled farmers. He mocked, flashing a disingenuous smile. "We're here to remind you that this land is ours, Victor. You won't take it without a fight," Sam asserted, planting his feet firmly in the dirt. Tension crackled in the air like electricity. Jake felt ready, tapping into the training he'd learned over the years. With a swift motion, Sam signaled for the first of their traps. The farmers sprang into action, throwing ropes that pulled down hay bales, creating a barrier that blocked the plunderers' path. Confusion washed over Victor's crew, panic mingling with anger as they stumbled over their own feet. Victor screamed, realizing their advantageous position was slipping away. But it was too late. Sam had seized the momentum. The farmers moved as one, utilizing every ounce of coordination they had developed during their training. Emotions surged within Sam, hope mingling with fury. He had turned years of hard work into a coherent defense, rallying his neighbors into a force greater than the sum of its parts. Wade, a wiry farmer known for his agility, darted toward the trucks, dodging an incoming figure attempting to pull him down. He shouted, a defiance radiating from him. They maneuvered through the chaos, creating makeshift obstructions to block access to the heavy machinery. With each obstacle they set, confidence swelled among the farmers while Victor and his crew became increasingly disoriented. As the dust began to settle, the plunderers' bravado faded, replaced by disbelief. The farmers were not just placing barriers, they were showing passion and determination, a force driven by the love for their legacy. Then came the sound of the machinery, a loud engine roaring to life meant to intimidate. But Sam shouted over the noise, "Hold your ground." As Victor's team struggled to navigate their equipment, another farmer released a rope that sent a contraption crashing toward the ground, further blocking the path. The chaos swirled around them like a tempest, the air filled with shouting and the smell of dust. "Retreat." Victor barked, but there was a tinge of panic in his voice, a stark contrast to the confidence he had displayed earlier. The farmers, now fueled by adrenaline, pressed forward, using their knowledge of the land and smart tactics against the plunderers. They were not just fighting a real estate venture, they were fighting for their identity, their heritage. Each shout echoed like an anthem of solidarity, urging them on as they pressed into the fray. Through all the noise and confusion, Sam felt an incredible sense of clarity. This battle was about so much more than just land. It was about unity, resilience, and courage. They had refused to succumb to fear, choosing instead to harness their determination and fight for what was right. In the heart of the fray, Victor's swagger finally crumbled completely. Desperation clawed at him, and he began to glance nervously at his crew who had started to back away from the scene. One of his men shouted, fear lacing his voice. "Go!" Victor yelled, the facade of control slipping away. With every passing moment, the tide turned further. The farmers surged with renewed strength, feeling a wave of empowerment at the sight of the plunderers retreating. As the last truck screeched away, dust clouding the air, the farmers erupted into cheers, their voices ringing out like a chorus of victory. Relief washed over Sam like a cleansing wave. They had defended not only their land but their community's spirit. He turned to Clara, who was bouncing with excitement. "We did it!" she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with triumph. "We did together," Sam replied, his heart swelling with pride. That day had become a turning point, not just in their battle against the plunderers but also in how they saw themselves. They were not merely farmers, they were warriors, united by an unyielding love of their home. As the sun began to set, casting warm hues across the fields, Sam couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The battle had forged deeper connections among the farmers, solidifying friendships that would last for generations. In that moment, Sam knew they had built a legacy not just on the land but within one another. They had shown that strength arose from community, that standing together could weather any storm. And with that thought resonating through him, Sam looked out over the fields, each row of crops symbolizing hope and perseverance. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he felt ready to face them, knowing that he had trained not just to survive, but to protect everything that mattered most. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the acres of shimmering corn, when the rumble of engines disrupted the morning peace. Farmer Tom stood on his porch, coffee cup in hand, squinting against the bright light as 3 black trucks rolled down the dirt road toward his farm. The tires kicking up dust felt like a warning, a storm approaching where once there had been calm. Tom's heart raced, recognition striking like a clap of thunder. They were plunderers seeking to pave over the rural landscape for their own gain, an unstoppable machine fueled by greed. This wasn't just gossip, it was a reality that now threatened the very soil he had nurtured for years. The trucks came to a sudden halt, and the men inside jumped out. Tom's pulse quickened as he scanned their sharply dressed forms. The leader, a tall man with slick-back hair and a self-satisfied grin, took a few confident strides toward Tom, his crew looming just behind him. He announced, his voice honeyed yet laced with arrogance. "Big day ahead." Tom stepped off the porch, posture straightening with defiance. Gary chuckled in that way people do when they think they hold all the cards. "Your farm, of course. This property has prime potential for development. Shopping centers, condos, you name it." The words hung heavy in the air, each syllable a slap against everything Tom held dear. This wasn't just land, this was home. His father had farmed this very ground, and before him his grandfather. They had built a legacy, and now someone wanted to bulldoze it for profit. "I'm not selling," Tom said, the tremor in his voice barely masked by his courage. "This is my family's land." Gary's grin faltered, replaced by an expression of mockery. "Let's not be foolish." He gestured toward his crew, their faces a mix of disbelief and amusement. Tom felt the heat rise in his chest, fueling a swift tide of fury. He had spent years preparing for hardships, not just in farming but in life. He had taken self-defense classes, learned techniques that required not just physical strength but strategy, mental fortitude. "I know more than you think," Tom replied, his voice steady. "You might have money, but you'll never understand the land like I do." The tension crackled, an unspoken battle line drawn between them. The plunderers exchanged glances, their confidence faltering for a flicker of a moment. But Gary's facade returned. "This isn't a negotiation, Tom." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Tom shot back, realizing that deep-rooted resolve was rising like a tide within him. Gary scoffed, retreating back to his crew with a wave of his hand. "You'll regret this." As the trucks roared away, Tom stood frozen on the porch, resolve hardening like the earth beneath his feet. He had seen the look in Gary's eyes. This wasn't over. That night sleep eluded him. Thoughts whirled in his mind, racing like the wind outside his window. He needed a plan. What could he do to protect his farm, his family's legacy? In his heart, he knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. The next morning, he took a drive to the local diner, a gathering spot where stories were shared over steaming cups of coffee. As he entered, the chatter quieted for a moment, gazes falling on him. He approached a table where Clara sat, her fierce spirit shining even in the early hour. She asked, her brow furrowed with concern. He took a deep breath. "The land grabbers came by yesterday." Gasps swept across the table. Clara's eyes narrowed. "They can't do that." "I need your help," Tom said, his voice firm. "This is not just about my farm, it's ours." The group of farmers leaned in closer, a fire igniting in their eyes. They began sharing stories of their own land, their own families. Each shared a piece of their heart, their fears transforming into resolve. They talked strategy, how they could fight back, pooling their strengths and their knowledge of the land. As ideas flowed, Sam, an older farmer with years of experience, spoke up. "We can't confront them directly, they'll overpower us, but we know this land better than they ever will." Tom felt a surge of hope. They could become the guardians of their land, uniting against the threat. Over the next few days, the farmers worked tirelessly, setting barriers, fortifying fences, and creating mud pits to slow any machinery that attempted to encroach. Each farmer brought their tools, their ingenuity, and most importantly, their camaraderie. The air buzzed with a mix of worry and determination. The day of the confrontation arrived. The sun shone down on the fields, but there was no warmth in the air, only tension. As the familiar sound of engines approached, Tom gathered the farmers, looking into their eyes with conviction. "Remember, we're not just fighting for this land, we're fighting for our families, our heritage." The trucks rolled to a stop, and Tom felt the adrenaline coursing through him. This wasn't just about stopping the plunderers. It was about standing up for what belonged to them. Gary stepped out of his truck, flanked by his crew. He smirked at the assembled farmers, oozing confidence. "You really think you can stop us? This is not just a farm to us," Tom shouted, his voice carrying over the tension. "It's our identity." The tension thickened like a storm cloud brewing overhead. As Gary opened his mouth to respond, Tom raised his arm. "Now!" At that signal, the farmers sprang into action. They had set up their traps, hay bales teetering on makeshift ropes, mud pits disguised but effectively muddying the process for any truck. The chaos descended as the first wave of plunderers stumbled into the path laid so carefully. Gary yelled, pure panic evident as he watched his men falter. Confusion and fear infiltrated their ranks, and the farmers seized the moment, charging forward in a united front. With strategy honed through their shared training, they circled around the trucks, coordination in every motion. Tom felt the adrenaline and the realization that they were indeed a force to be reckoned with. Each farmer fought not just for the land, but for one another. Wade dashed between the trucks, using agility honed from years of running the fields to evade the plunderers. He cried out, and his words resonated like war drums rallying the troops. As the plunderers tried to regain control, the farmers pressed on, creating makeshift barricades out of whatever tools they had on hand. The sight was both chaotic and exhilarating. They were not just treading water, they were rising to the surface, breathing deeply for the fight. But just when it seemed victory was within their grasp, the engines roared louder. A mob of frustrated men tried to reclaim their dominance, shoving past Tom and Clara. The farmers stood their ground, feeling an undeniable wave of determination as they held together. Tom shouted, locked in combat but fueled by purpose. A sense of clarity washed over him. This was not merely a battle against plunderers. It was a testament to their way of life. This was family, and they would not falter. Each push against the collective weight of their adversaries only fueled their resolve. Still, as the chaos unfolded, Gary sensed the tide turning. "Regroup," he shouted, but it was too late. The farmers had found their rhythm, their tenacity built upon years of shared struggles. With one last massive push, Sam led the charge, rallying the farmers to close the circle around the plunderers, their voices harmonizing in a resolve that overcame their antagonists. The sight of teamwork in the face of greed was as powerful as any weapon. As the last of the plunderers retreated, throwing their hands up in defeat, the farmers erupted with cheers. Relief washed over Tom, a wave of victory that surged through his spirit. "We did it!" Clara exclaimed, her face radiant with triumph. "We held our ground," Tom responded, heart full, gratitude pouring forth like the light of the setting sun. Reality flooded over him. This day had become etched in their lives. It was a moment that would resonate forever in the community's history. They had fought together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the weight of everything began to settle in. They hadn't just won a battle, they had created a bond deeper than the soil itself. This farm was not merely land but a tapestry of shared hopes and dreams woven together through blood, sweat, and tears. Tom took a deep breath, letting it emerge slowly. He looked across the sprawling fields, the sun setting in hues of gold and crimson, illuminating what they had protected. They were not just farmers, they were warriors, standing in defiance against an injustice that sought to strip them of everything they had built. Together they had prevailed, but more importantly, they had forged a legacy that would stand the test of time, a victory that would echo through generations. In that moment of unity, each farmer knew that they might face challenges again, but as long as they stood together, the spirit of the land would live on, resilient and unyielding. They had not just defended a farm, they had nurtured meaning, purpose, and family, a strength that could weather any storm. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an amber glow over the fields, where rows of corn stood tall and proud like guardians of the land. But on this peaceful autumn day, a storm was brewing in the distance, and it wasn't the kind that brought rain. A heavy rumble echoed through the air, growing louder as a convoy of black SUVs barreled down the dirt road toward the farm. Farmer Jack stood on his porch, eyes narrowing as he watched the approaching vehicles, a knot twisted in his stomach. He had heard the rumors, the whispers about a group called the Redeemers, a band of plunderers rumored to be stalking the outskirts of town, ready to swoop in and seize what they could not earn. And now it seemed they had come for his home. Jack's heart raced, recalling the stories told by neighbors in hushed tones over coffee. Tales of similar farms being bulldozed overnight, families uprooted, rich developers turning fertile fields into parking lots. He shook his head. Not his farm, not on his watch. As the SUVs rolled to a stop, 4 sharply dressed men emerged, each one wearing that same self-assured smirk. The leader, a man named Marcus, stepped forward, hands confidently tucked into his suit pockets as if he owned the world, a predator among livestock. "Nice little place you've got here, Jack," Marcus drawled, his voice dripping with casual malice. "We've got a big plan for this land, big plans for you too." Jack felt a rush of anger surge through him. This land isn't a business deal. It's home. His gaze hardened, meeting Marcus's eyes. Marcus chuckled, the sound cold and mocking. "You think your sentimental attachment means anything? The world is changing. This land could be worth millions." Jack felt his fists clench at his sides. He had worked too hard, fought too long to let a bunch of opportunists come in and take what was rightfully his. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. Marcus studied Jack as though contemplating a piece of meat, his smirk faltering. Then he straightened, a sneer still tugging at his lips. "You'll regret this, Jack." With that, the group turned and climbed back into their vehicles, leaving a swirl of dust in their wake. Jack felt a surge of relief, but it was quickly eclipsed by an avalanche of dread. This wasn't over. He could feel those words vibrating in the air like a storm gathering force on the horizon. That night, sleep evaded him. Jack tossed and turned in his bed, shadows dancing on the walls, recalling every moment of the confrontation. He thought of his father, who had stood on the very same porch, who had told him tales of brotherhood and strength, the kind that forged communities to fight against greed. He had trained for difficult times. He had learned self-defense after a string of local thefts and had honed his skills using everything from pitchforks to his own unyielding spirit. He had prepared for the challenges of farm life, not just in cultivating crops but in protecting what mattered most. The next day, he awoke with a new sense of purpose. He gathered the neighboring farmers at the old barn, a place steeped in history and the shared struggles of their ancestors. As the sun streamed through the gaps in the wood, filling the space with a warm glow, Jack looked around at the faces he knew so well. They were friends, family people who understood the value of land as much as he did. "We have to stand together," he said, his voice steady but firm. "The Redeemers think they can take our farms without consequence, but we know this land better than they ever will." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Clara, a fiercely independent woman who had managed her dairy farm single-handedly, stepped forward. "We can't let them win. We've fought through droughts, floods, hard winters." "We need a strategy," Jack continued, pulling out a large map of the property. "We can set traps, use the terrain to our advantage." As they gathered around the table, voices started to combine in a symphony of determination. They planned carefully, setting up barricades and obstacles, utilizing everything from old machinery to hay bales. They worked tirelessly, laughter mingling with shouts of camaraderie. Jack felt energy coursing through him, a shared purpose that strengthened their resolve. Days passed quickly, the air filled with a buzz of anticipation and anxiety. Jack could feel the weight of the decision before them. He had a responsibility not only to his farm but to the entire community. If the Redeemers came back, they would need to be ready. Finally, the day arrived. The sun rose bright and strong, but the air was thick with tension. Jack gathered the farmers at the edge of the property, his heart pounding. He called out, adrenaline surging through him. "Stand tall, stay together." As the distant roar of engines approached, Jack felt a mix of nerves and excitement rising within him. This was not just about a farm, this was a statement, a stand against the threat that haunted their way of life. The black SUVs pulled up once more, the same sharp suits stepping out. Jack's breath quickened as he stepped forward to meet them, every fiber of his being tuned for the fight ahead. He called out, his voice steady. Marcus shot him a look that could melt stone. "This is your last chance." Jack stood tall, recognizing the weight of the moment. "And I told you I'm not selling." In that split second, the tension exploded. With a signal from Jack, the farmers sprang into action. Traps were activated, ropes lashed tight, and hay bales toppled, creating barriers between the bewildered plunderers and their intended gain. "What the?" Marcus bellowed as his men stumbled over the obstacles, panic flickering in their eyes. The farmers had turned the tables. They knew this land like the back of their hands, and now they were using it to fight back. As the chaos spread, Jack felt a surge of adrenaline. He shouted, rallying the farmers to stand together like a wall of resistance. They advanced, surrounding the plunderers, each movement synchronized like a well-oiled machine. The spirit of their community shone through, igniting courage and determination. What was once a quiet patch of land became a battleground, a clash of ideals, a clash of wills. Jack's heart raced as he witnessed the resolve in his friends' eyes, the fear in the plunderers' faces. They had underestimated what it meant to defend your home. "Regroup," Marcus shouted, his fingers clenched, frustration morphing into desperation. They had not anticipated the fierce unity of the community, forged through shared love for the land that echoed ancestors' sacrifices. As the farmers pressed on, Jack shouted commands. "Use the ramshackle barn as cover." They utilized everything at their disposal, every tool, every ounce of spirit honed through years of hard work. Laughter erupted amidst the chaos, the sound echoing across the fields, a battle hymn of unwavering resolution. Tom could feel the tide turning, the light of hope igniting as the plunderers realized they were outmatched. But just then, a new roar filled the air, a heavy engine approaching from behind. Fear coursed through Jack as he turned, eyes widening at the sight of a massive bulldozer barreling toward them, determined to crush everything in its path. What on earth? Jack's thoughts rushed as he realized the plunderers had brought in reinforcements, ready to demolish their fight. Marcus shouted, panic seeping into his voice. But it was too late. The bulldozer approached like a monster poised to consume everything in its path. Jack yelled, heart pounding wildly. They had to act fast. He turned on his heels, adrenaline exploding, and ran toward the approaching machine. "Tom, Clara," he shouted, every step fueled by a surge of courage. But the bulldozer was relentless, roaring as it crushed their carefully arranged defenses. The sight sent ripples of fear through the farmers, but Jack didn't have time to dwell on it. There was no retreat. He would fight for every inch of what he had built. As the machine roared ever closer, Jack tore free ropes from the hay bales and quickly devised a plan. Grab the pitchforks. He sensed the weight of the moment, acutely aware that this could be their last stand. Jack glanced back at his friends who stood united behind him, determination etched on their faces. With a battle cry, they surged forward, thrusting forward their pitchforks to create a defensive line against the unstoppable force of steel. The bulldozer rumbled closer, drums of war echoing in their ears as the farmers charged. It was now or never. They were fighting not merely for land, but for their legacy, the strength of a community woven together by generations of sacrifice, love, and grit. Jack shouted, his voice rising above the roar of machinery. But then, in a moment of shattering clarity, he noticed a figure climbing down from the bulldozer's cabin, a man dressed in an orange vest, a construction worker who had likely underestimated the chaos unfolding around him. Moments before disaster devolved into chaos, their paths crossed, a pivotal moment that hung in the air like a fragile thread. Jack's heart raced as their eyes met. Would this stranger join the fight or stand by and watch as destruction descended upon their community? The ground trembled beneath them, a rumble fueled by more than just heavy machinery. All eyes were fixed on the battle between two opposing forces, the essence of greed versus the spirit of community, an age-old conflict unfolding under the vast sky. With desperation weighing down the very atmosphere, that single moment stretched into an eternity, teetering on the brink of everything Tom held dear. Would this day mark their triumph or their downfall? What would happen next would define not just the farm but the very fabric of their lives, and Jack knew deep down that the resolution lay just beyond the horizon waiting to be seized. The clash was far from over, and the ultimate fate of everything he cherished hung in the balance.